Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Property and Local Tax Division to order.
So it be said, let it be.
At the not request, I believe, insistence of Ms. Hawkins. Representative Nelson, can you move the March 13th, 2013 minutes, please? So moved. Thank you. Any discussion to the March 13th, 2013 minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. And also, Representative Veritas.
Yes, sir.
I believe you were an active participant on the March 19th minutes. Would you move their approval, sir?
I will move those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any discussion to the Hertas motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Thank you all very much. We are going to rearrange the agenda some from the printed document that's available for the public out of respect, the traditional respect for, first of all, or partially members who are not members of the committee, and also, and more importantly, real citizens, real people who come from outside the metropolitan area. So we're going to start with Representative Lien's bill, House File 1608, to accommodate some of his testifiers who actually came from quite a distance. So with that, Representative Lien, would you like to move your bill, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do move House File 1608 to be heard and possibly included in the division omnibus, or excuse me, the division report.
Very good. Thank you very much. With that, Representative Lien, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 1608 is the establishing a new formula for the local government aid program and also appropriating $80 million for the program. I think this is a very important bill for a couple reasons. The last time LGA was reformulated was 2002 and has since received quite a lot of criticism in the last couple of years. Some of that criticism was seen in a study group, the local government aid study group, convened in 2009, which had a couple findings, major findings. The three most important findings were that the current formula is too complex and hard to understand. There's a lack of predictability, and thus it makes it hard for local governments to budget. And that some of the factors that go into establishing need for cities are out of date and, well, don't make sense. I think it's also indicative that, along with the appropriation in the governor's budget, he had also kind of started this conversation to take a look at reformulating the need structure for LGA. And before I get into the bill, I would like to move an author's amendment, the A1 amendment, to get it in the form that I would prefer.
Thank you very much. Representative Lien moves the H 1608A1 amendment, its author's amendment, to get the bill in the form that he prefers. Any discussion to the A1 amendment? Hearing none. Oh, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I heard but I saw. Did not hear but I saw.
Representative Lien, why are you striking federal census?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Erickson, from what I understand, and Ms. Dalton can maybe explain this in a little better detail, but what I understand is that this will allow us to take a look at the American City Survey's information.
Ms. Dalton, can you assist here, please?
For the record, I'm Pat Dalton with House Research. The issue is that the long form of the federal census was replaced by the American Community Survey Act, which is an annual survey, and it looks at 5-year weighted averages. Even if we were not changing the formula, we should be updating this to just talk about data provided by the United States Bureau of the Census as opposed to the federal census.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Dalton, I wonder, though, how many of those were returned, because I received calls on those. I don't know if my constituency was returning them. So I don't know if that's an accurate document to use anyway.
Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Erickson, it is an issue with actually, frankly, all census data. The data is better the larger the locality, and that's actually one of the things that this formula or this new proposal does, it does not use any census data for any city under 2,500 anymore. So that should hopefully mean that the data that is being used for the cities, the larger and medium-sized cities, are better data. But this is the only source of the housing data now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion to the A1 amendment? Neither seeing nor hearing any. All those in favor of the A1, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Representative Lien, to your bill as amended, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just briefly here touch on the different sections of the bill, allow Ms. Dalton to give some testimony on to some of the more data-driven details of the bill. We also have a couple testifiers from some of the city groups to give some testimony in support of the bill.
Excellent.
Section 1 of the bill establishes a definition for one of the need factors, let me see, in both the medium city and the large city measures, and that is pre-1940 housing percentage, or the percentage of housing built before 1940. The second section lays out a definition for the percent of housing built between 1940 and 1970, which is a need factor. Give me one. Which is a need factor in the large city measure. Section 3 of the bill gets into establishing the different need factors for the three different size cities. And this is something that I think folks really coalesced around, an idea folks really coalesced around, is having sort of a three-tier system of need factors based on three different size cities. So, for example, small cities or cities with a population less than 2,500, the need factors based on population with a per capita amount going to cities which would be between $410 per capita and $630 per capita, again, based on population. For medium-sized cities, cities between 2,500 and 10,000, the need factors, there are three need factors. Again, the pre-1940 housing, population, or excuse me, household size, and population decline since 1970, or in other words, taking into account the peak population since 1970 and what that population is in the current year. For cities larger than 10,000, we have, again, the pre-1940 housing percentage, the percentage of housing built between 1940 and 1970, and jobs per capita. Section 3 also gets into some of the transition factors for cities going from the small city measure to the medium-sized city measure. In other words, cities between 2,500 and 3,000. And again, for cities going between the medium size to the large size, which would be cities transitioning and allowing for some transition between 10,000 and 10,500. And the third area in Section 3 pertains to inflation as a measure with the revenue need, and this is something that is similar to current law, so it's basically the revenue need times the inflation factor. Section 4 of the bill lays out the jobs per capita definition, which again was one of the need measures for the large cities. Section 5 lays out the definition for peak population decline, and again, that was one of the need factors for the medium-sized cities, which again was population decline from the peak since 1970. Section 6 of the bill lays out the formula aid for a city, and this basically establishes once a city has its need measure, it lays out the amounts of money that would go to a city. So basically for 2014, the city's formula aid would be the 2013 certified aid plus the difference between its unmet need and its 2013 certified aid times the aid gap percentage. And for 2015 and going forward, it would be very similar. We would just be taking the previous year's numbers. Section 7 of the bill is taking a look at the city aid distribution, which is the city formula aid amount and then taking into account different adjustments. And those adjustments are laid out in Section 8 of the bill. Now, these adjustments for the cities of Newport, Crookston, and Mendota will be phased out either 2013 or 2014. Section 9 of the bill is the appropriation amount, and in the original bill, this was blank. In the amendment, it has been amended to an amount of $506,438,012, and we did that so that with some of the runs we had for the amount of aid a city would get under the new formula, we would have sort of a number to go off of, sort of a number to base those runs off of. Section 10 of the bill talks about inflation, which is a new idea for the new formula. And basically, the inflation allows for an increase in appropriation based on inflation and growth in city populations around the state. Now, this inflation factor will be between 2.5% and 5%. And Section 11 of the bill repeals old language that was used for the old formula.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dalton, do you have information to add to that presentation?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think probably the biggest difference in the new formula versus the formula in current law is that what the formula really works is distributing is trying to meet the difference between what a city needs and what they currently receive. And so this doesn't take money from cities based on their relative share. However, you don't get new money unless you have unmet need that exceeds what you are currently getting. If you have unmet need that is less than what you are currently getting, beginning in 2015, you can have a decrease. And the decrease is very similar to the decrease allowed under current law, which is the lesser of $10 per capita or 5% of your previous year's levy. And
all right.
Mr. Chair, and the other thing I would say is that one of the other differences is that this LGA formula is scalable, unlike current law. So if you have unmet need that is not currently paid for out of your certified aid, you will get a portion of the new money. And how big your portion is determined by how far you are from that unmet need right now. So if, as I said, this bill is, the printouts are modeled on $80 million. If the printouts were modeled on $100 million, the same cities would be winners. It's just that they would get more. If it was modeled on $60 million, again, the same cities would be winners. They would just get proportionately less.
Thank you. Questions from members? Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this first question is for Ms. Dalton. Back before 2003, a large percent of the aid was grandfathered in versus really formula-based. And after 2003, I think it was down to about 5% grandfathered. 5%, yeah, grandfathered, and the rest was aid. So what would that be now? Is there anything grandfathered now, or is it all off the formula?
Ms. Dalton.
Am I explaining myself correctly?
Mr. Chair, Representative Marquardt, the formula determines the need in all cases except one, and that is for the city of Warroad. There is a guaranteed $150,000 for 5 years. One of the things that the LGA study group had suggested was to go back and look at all the grandfathers that have been granted over the years, and this was the only one they decided to keep, but following what the LGA study group had said, they did put a sunset date on it, so the city has to come back in and make a case for the money if they wanted to continue.
Representative Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So, Ms. Dalton, has there ever been a time where this much of it has been based on the formula versus grandfather?
Ms. Dalton?
I know when it first started, it was kind of based on even revenues or what they spent, but how are we sitting in comparison to historic numbers on?
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in some ways that's a little hard to say because there was some similarity to this back in the early 70s in terms of increases were distributed via the formula. However, the difference between what was going on in the 70s and now is there were no decreases if the formula said you didn't need it.
Right.
Whereas under this formula, if the formula says you don't need what you are currently getting, you can lose.
And
Representative Markowitz.
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just one comment off of that. I do think the formula, the more it is off the formula, the more credibility it has, rather than when you have all the grandfather, which really doesn't get to the true need. So, I know over the years, and I think Ms. Dalton has come back to this about every 11 years or something like that. There's a cycle when we end up redoing this. But I think it's important that we do because much of this, I think, is the credibility and confidence that not only legislators, but cities around the state have in a formula based on something that really is neat. And you can, you come to a lot to try to agree on what that formula is, but once it's set, I think it's important that you do have as much possible on the formula. It sounds like we're almost completely formula now, so thank you. So all those who, Chair Dabney, I know you were very involved in all the city groups, and Representative Lien and Ms. Dalton and staff, thank you so much for coming together and putting together a formula that I think is very workable.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I'd never like to disagree with House staff, but just to be clear, you brought up the term, taking care of unmet needs. Just to be clear, we have a health care funding crisis, an education funding crisis, a legislative pay funding crisis. There are scads of funding crises at this Capitol, regardless of how much taxes are raised. There will always be unmet needs coming to this Capitol for local government aid and other services. So, but that's not my question, and I certainly would never want to ask a question of staff to get in a debate on it. But my question is for the author of the bill, particularly on page 6 and 7, section 10 of the bill. This has to do with the Representative Lien with the inflation adjustment measure, and you're using the implicit price deflator for government expenditures and gross investment in state and local government purchases, which every member of the committee should know. If they don't know, I'll state this. They are far more likely to grow faster than the traditional form of inflation, the consumer price index. And what no one would dispute is that when you take that and you track it versus personal income, that implicit price deflator grows faster than personal income. Now, there's a 2.5% and a 5% cap on there. But my question is that it looks like we're autopiloting some automatic spending increases in the LGA formula. In the event that personal income comes up short of that, how are we going to pay for that?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo. To be honest, that was actually one of the questions, one of the concerns I had was this to me looks like it's money that's just going to automatically be appropriated, and what check or what balance do we have to take care of that, take that into account? I do like the idea, though, that this formula will grow as cities grow. And I certainly understand the concerns about the inflation factor here being higher than personal income, but this inflation factor is for the price that local governments have to pay to provide services. So I think it's a more accurate factor of inflation for the purposes of this money. And as to how those numbers were arrived at between 2.5% and 5%, possibly Ms. Schill can provide more detail on that.
Ms. Dalton?
Excuse me, Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, the formula is very similar to the appropriation increase that existed in the LGA formula between 1993 and 2003. That was removed in 2003 under the governor's bill. To give you, I did actually take a look at what the IPD is projected to be for the next 6 years, and it tends to be between 2% and 2.3%. The IPD for the Consumer Price Index, you are right, is slightly lower. It tends to vary between 1.7% and 2% during that same time period. Generally, the CPI is slightly lower than the IPD. However, that's not entirely the case. There have actually been 2 years in the last 4 where the IPD was actually lower than the CPI.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to staff. When I look at 2010 through 2013, I see 1 year. I see 2009, and that's primarily as a result of the effects of the federal stimulus, which was not priced into state and local government. As everyone knows, state and local units of government cut expenditures in the local level and filled in those potholes with federal stimulus money. But the numbers I have for CPI versus IPD, that's not the case. So maybe I would have to review with staff the sources of our information to see if they're, if we're getting divergent data. But my question, another question, Representative Lien, is that you made the statement that this is what local units of government are paying, and unfortunately, or I guess I should say fortunately, that's not the case, because this is a national measurement, and what happens is disproportionately states like California and New York, when they fund massive salary and benefits increases for their public employees, actually distort the national measurement of inflation. It's the mother of all circular references. The reason why costs for government are going up is because government is spending more money. Therefore, they need additional money to pay for these costs. And so my concern is that we are putting on autopilot spending measures that are going to be above personal income growth. And so I'll, just from a math perspective, I will ask, in the event that these inflation measures track what they are versus personal income growth, and we have the implicit price deflator growing automatically faster than personal income, how are we going to pay for this?
Representative Lien, do 134 members of the House and 67 members of the Senate and the governor have any influence over what happens to the LGA formula in future years?
I would imagine they would through appropriations, Mr. Chair.
Oh, really?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate
Representative Garofalo.
I appreciate the attempt at least being humorous, but I asked a question. I'll ask it a third time, Representative Lien. In the event that we continue to see this trend where spending grows is automatically pegged to grow at a faster rate than personal income growth, what will subsequent legislatures have to do to address that?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo, I do appreciate your concerns, and again, those were the same concerns I had. That was one of my first questions about this bill, was taking a look at that built-in growth of the inflation. How is that going to be taken into account? And that was my understanding of why that number was used for this bill, is so that it's a way to accurately address inflation for what governments have to address in order to provide the services.
And
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Lien. I understand your intent for the bill. I understand that you want to provide additional resources to communities through local government aid. My question for you is, in the event that you have the data going forward, track what it has in the past, that you have measures of government inflation growing faster than personal income, what are subsequent legislatures to do to correct that problem?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo, I would have to defer to House staff as far as how.
That's okay. No, Mr. Chairman.
Let him finish. Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to say, Representative Garofalo, I'd have to defer back to House staff as to what measures could be taken.
Mr.
Representative
Chairman,
Garofalo.
and I'll answer the question for the gentleman. What the subsequent legislatures will have to do is take appropriations from other areas of the budget and put it into LGA, or we're going to have to raise taxes. That's what we're going to have to do, because what we're doing is we're baking into the brownies for future budget forecasts automatic spending increases that are faster than personal income growth. And that's not an ideological concern. It's not a political philosophy concern. That's a problem with math. And we're seeing a lot of challenges with math in this current legislature and this current governor, and this is another example of the concerns I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Garofalo. Any other questions from members? Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question goes to staff. I'd like to have a little better explanation of how the revenue need formulas were established while those numbers were selected to determine just what cities' needs are.
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, the formulas were actually developed, for the most part, statistically. There was a regression analysis done. The small city formula is actually based on an analysis that was originally done but has been updated for a bill that was introduced by Representative Marquardt back in 2007 that looked at spending patterns for smaller cities on a per capita basis, and there turned out to be a pattern that was very apparent graphically. And so because so much data is somewhat suspect for the smallest cities, I mean, we have cities with a population of 17 in this state, the decision was made to just go with the population measure for need for the smallest cities, for the cities under 2,500, using that analysis updated to get the coefficients for it. For the medium and large cities, originally there was some look at trying to do all of them together. However, some of the initial analysis showed that there were different factors that explained different spending or revenue need, which was what was used as the dependent variable, which has always been used as dependent variable in both the 2003 LGA and the 1993 LGA. Revenue need is, or revenue base is a measure of levy plus aid for each city, including the taconite aids, and it is used as a proxy for spending. That number is regressed on factors that have been identified by the interested parties, in this case the members who were meeting and the city organizations, as factors that they felt were important in explaining variation in spending, but statistical analysis was used to determine, number one, whether those factors were important, and then what weight to give to those factors.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you for that. I got some of it, frankly.
I feel your pain.
I've been looking at this most of the day, and my head hurts. But so, is it in your opinion that these formulas are accurate?
Representative Dalton, opinion?
Representative Dalton? Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, the one thing I've always told people throughout my 20-some years of doing this is that there are a number of ways that you can measure need, and how good a formula is in measuring need is if it makes sense. And as I said, the legislators looked at the factors that we considered, and so did the city groups, and they felt that they could explain what these factors measured as it relates to city spending, and there is some statistical validity. It does explain variation in spending between cities. Does it explain all variation? No. Both of these formulas only explain roughly 50% of the variation in the revenue base. But if we had just updated the coefficients for the current formula, we were explaining less than 30% of the variation in spending for cities.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for Ms. Dalton, we're establishing this need figure for all the cities, but we're not going to meet that need instantly by any means. Have you estimated how long it will take, given the estimated inflation in here, until we actually get to the point where we have met these city need figures?
Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, no, I have not. Basically, what this formula right now is going to fill, with the $80 million, it's going to fill 19% of the gap between need and what is currently being distributed. But I have not figured out how many years it would take with inflation and appropriation increases before all of it is filled.
Representative Torkelson.
Would you care to select between years, decades, and centuries?
It'll change if we get too far.
Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, I would say closer to a decade than to 2 decades. I would say it would, just because of compounding, I would guess it's, going to be somewhere in the 8 to 15-year range. But again, it will depend on inflation. If you're growing at 2.5% and compounding, that's much different than growing at 5% and compounding.
Perhaps you'd like to start Representative Torkelson a pool.
Perhaps I would. Maybe we could pay for a stadium.
It might generate more revenues than current.
Just one final question.
Representative Torkelson.
No, I forgot my question. I will leave it for later. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lien, in your introduction to the bill, you pointed out that there's a great need. Part of the original premise of local government aid and property tax relief to cities by giving them aid would offer their property taxpayers relief. Why is it then in your bill that about 50% of the population of Minnesota is ignored under the formula?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Dalton.
I think I'll defer to Ms. Dalton.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Hertaus.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hertaus, about 1/4 of the population in Minnesota is located in townships, and townships are not eligible for LGA. We have not paid LGA to townships in a dozen years. I'm looking at Steve, hoping he remembers the exact year. I believe it was 2001 was the last year we paid township aid, and we didn't pay very much even back then.
And there's a nod in the back of the room. So you look this way, I'll look that way, and between the two, I think we've got it.
And even back then, it was about $3 per capita is what we were paying in township aid. The other quarter of the state that is not getting LGA are cities that, because of their high tax base per capita, do not have what the formula considers unmet need, that they are able to meet the need that the formula calculates for them using an average city tax rate times their tax base. So if they have a very high tax base, they can raise enough locally that they don't need state aid, and so therefore they aren't getting any under the formula. And that's same as what's going on in current law.
Ms. Dalton, how many cities receive, under this proposal LGA, how many cities receive police and fire aid to help their budgets with that area of spending? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I actually looked this up right before I came down. Under current law, there's 107 cities who do not get LGA. Under this formula being proposed in House File 1608, there are 85 cities who will get no aid, and all 853 or 54 cities currently get police and fire aid.
So, Ms. Dalton, just to clarify, those 85 cities that do not get LGA under the Lien proposal do get police and fire aid. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I believe so.
All right.
No.
Thank you very much.
That's not correct?
No.
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that's correct. Metro cities, for example, many of them who are small cities do not get any fire and police aid whatsoever. And as a mayor, I can tell you that that's true. With regard to the formula, though, I guess the question is why are many small metro cities exempted from this formula? Why is there, with regard to talking about average tax capacity per capita, that infers that because you have a low population and a high or a higher per capita tax capacity, that somehow infers an ability to meet need on an individual household basis. I can tell you it's really quite just the opposite. This formula totally ignores even taking the total tax capacity of a city into consideration. You know, LGA was targeted at those communities who didn't have tax capacity in order to generate the revenues to provide the basic needs of police and fire. So this formula, I think, is a bad formula. It totally ignores it, and we've got many suburbs in the 3rd suburban ring, 4th suburban ring on the edge of the metro that simply have low numbers of households, low numbers of rooftops, very low city budgets. They're unable to pass city budgets to take care of basic needs. They're unable to pass school tax levy referenda to take care of schools. And these are the very communities that should be targeted for LGA, and yet we're giving 50% of total LGA to a handful of cities. You know, 75% of the 850 cities, if I have my facts right, in Minnesota are under 5,000 in population, have relatively low tax capacities and low populations. I don't understand, Mr. Chair, why we are ignoring the total tax capacity in this formula.
Representative Hertas, what aspect of tax capacity is not being contemplated in this formula?
When you take a whole community, well, let's use Minneapolis-St. Paul, for example. They have a huge tax capacity in order to levy and raise their own funds to take care of their basic needs, to provide fire and police, and then you go out into these small towns, they have little ability to produce the revenue necessary to provide police and fire. That's my argument. You go from billions of dollars of tax capacity in large cities to a few $100 million, if even that, in some of the cities, particularly metro communities. I can tell you that 11 of the 11 cities in my district, in West Hennepin County, 9 of them get 0 LGA. But yet they're all taxpayers to the LGA system and in this redistribution, but there's many of these communities that should be getting government aid. We're talking about communities that have budgets of less than $1.5 million. We've got maybe 700 or 800 rooftops, and you know, this formula just it's not good enough. It needs to be fixed.
Representative Hertas, is that 9 out of 11 communities in your district current law or the proposed formula? And does that number change under the proposed formula?
Current and proposed, there's no change, and we need to do something to fix this.
All right. Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, I do want to correct, because I phoned a friend while we were talking. Cities who choose to contract for their police and fire service with another entity, they do not get police and fire aid because they don't have a department.
Okay.
And there are small cities who that's what they do.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Hertas.
And that's the very thing that we should be encouraging in communities is consolidation and sharing of services. We don't need a ladder truck in every town. That's the very thing we should be doing, and you know, that shouldn't be a reason to be disqualifying for that service. Nonetheless, you take these same small cities are spending 25-30% of their annual budgets just in contract for police and fire services. And it's a heavy burden, even if it's contracted out. So we're not adequately addressing some of these communities with this current law, and I would hope that the author of the bill would take that into consideration.
All right. Other questions from members? Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to my earlier line of questioning. In the future, if a legislature finds it impossible to add more money to the formula, what would be the impact?
Representative Lien.
80 more million than today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Torkelson, I suppose we would have to draft an amendment or come up with a certain way to rework the formula.
No, you wouldn't.
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, what happens is most cities would stay essentially getting what they were getting the previous year if there was no new money. The exception would be any city that has unmet need less than what they are currently getting. That money would be cut and redistributed to cities who still have an unmet need aid gap. But that would be a relatively minor movement of money.
Representative Torkelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then just one more scenario. If there should be a cut in total LGA, would this formula accommodate a cut?
Representative Dalton. Sorry, Ms. Dalton. Did I do that again? Is that the second time I've done that? Yeah. Okay. You phone a friend on questions. I'm going to get coffee. I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Mr. Chair, right now the formula is not set up to anticipate that. So if there was a cut in appropriation, there would have to be some language changes to address that. It assumes either a constant appropriation level or an increased appropriation level.
Representative Torkelson.
So, and that would be true no matter where in this, say we were near the end of this cycle in that second decade, that would be so even at that point in time?
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson, I believe that would be correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other question I forgot. I'm confounded what bearing how old the housing stock of private property has with regard to calculating what your benefit should be. Could you explain that to me, Representative Lien?
Representative Lien.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Hertaus. If I'm reading your question correct, the age in housing stock would take into account, excuse me, let me find my notes here. It would take into account, as a city declines or as the age of a city goes on, that you would still have to maintain certain infrastructures for that city.
Mr. Hertaus.
Well, how that's normally done is streets and other things have a useful life. Those things are replaced and assessed to the benefiting property owner. There is a mechanism in place that takes care of that. So what bearing with regard to providing other services like police and fire does how old a house of private property have to do with anything with the number of constituents that are served?
Ms. Dalton, since you worked on developing the formula, proxy is the latest word in my vocabulary.
Mr. Chair, Representative Torkelson. Hertaus. I apologize. Representative Hertaus. The use of the word proxy is a very good word to be using in this. It's very difficult to measure city need directly. Unlike school districts where you can say you are serving a student and you are serving a kindergartner or a high schooler, there are very concrete ways to measure what you are serving. That's not the case for cities. So the factors that show up in the city formulas are often considered to be proxies for other things that are not measurable. In the case of the age of housing stock, it is a proxy for both development level of a city and also the age of the infrastructure. If you have a lot of houses that were built before 1940 or a lot of houses built between 1940 and 1970, you tend to have aging infrastructure. And you are right, special assessments can cover some of the costs, but they can't cover replacements that do not increase the value of the property. And so that is a increased cost that cities incur when their infrastructure is aging. And so that is actually what it's primarily a proxy for.
Representative Hertaus, anything else?
Well, my counter to that argument is that usually those things are considered with regard to the market and the price and the value of property. So usually those things are taken into consideration and are discounted, even to the extent that if you know that a looming pending assessment is imminent, that will tend to drive the price down of the property. So there's compensating factors for that. Those are market-driven, not government-driven. So I just think that this formula, and particularly with aging of house stock, tends to favor who's going to get the LGA as opposed to a fair and equal distribution of LGA dollars.
Representative Marquardt.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And, you know, one of the major purposes of local government aid is always been known as kind of the great equalizer. And I know as part of the formula, it's to try to measure, you know, what is your ability to raise revenue. And it's kind of a equalization of effort. And one thing I'd like to see, which we don't have the data, and might help answer Representative Hertas's questions a little bit, would be as, like, what would 1% of tax rate raise in dollars per capita? And I think that would be very revealing, because what we find out typically would be that those cities that are receiving LGA, that would be much lower versus those cities that do not. And I think that's kind of the main purpose of local government aid, and I think what everyone's trying to do is to say, no matter where you live in this state, that $1 of effort or 1% of effort is going to get you roughly the same amount of services, because if you buy a fire truck in one area, it costs the same somewhere else. You don't get it cheaper because you're in a place with a lower tax base and so forth. But I want to focus on one other area of the bill that we haven't so far, and that's the increase in the $80 million. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Representative Lien, I applaud you for bringing this forward, because we know that there's been hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to local government aid over the last 10 years, and cities are feeling that. And so I applaud you for bringing this $80 million forward. Still not getting to where we were, but what are you hearing from cities? I mean, what's the need there for cities for this extra $80 million in local government aid?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Marquardt. You know, I haven't heard specific numbers from cities as far as what they would need to get them to a level that would be comparable had those cuts not taken place. I know from my own hometown, Moorhead, we are roughly at $340,000 less in 2012 than what we saw in 2003. So, excuse me, $349,000 less. So that's just one example. What I have heard from cities, though, Coalition of Greater Minnesota, Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, League of Cities, the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, is that there's overwhelming support for this proposal, not just for the new formula, but also for that appropriation, that it's, you know, at least a starting point to get us back to where we were before a lot of those cuts.
Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Representative Lien, besides the numbers, I mean, what are they talking about as far as where they could put those dollars? What type of services?
Representative Lien.
Thank you, Chair Dabney and Representative Marquardt. It's for Moorhead, I know it's snow plowing for one. As Moorhead's growing, we've seen a lot of growth in the southeast sector of the city, so that's all new infrastructure, new street maintenance, new sewer water. Along with that growth and expansion of cities, there's police officers to be hired on to maintain public safety. There's firefighters to maintain public safety. So it's really, as cities have grown in those last 10 years, just getting back to a place where they would be able to provide these fundamental services for their communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Lien, thank you for bringing this. Representative Hercall, you know, you talk about cities with housing older than 1940. I know cities with housing from 1880, with the sewers that are still serving them. Those sewers have a lifetime of 50 years. And they've gone over 75 years. I don't know how they do it, but they do. I have more than 120-year-old housing in my district. And fortunately, St. Paul, about 40 years ago, redid those when I think the state required us to separate out the sewer and the rain gutters. So in 10 years, those sewers that have already been replaced once will have to be replaced again. That's what local government aid does. That's how the cities can do that when they are not raising the value of your property by changing your sewer. This state has so many infrastructure problems laying out in front of it, from bridges over freeways, bridges over creeks, sewers, water lines. They just replaced over 100-year-old water lines that were serving a manufacturer in my district that had 3,000 people working in it. And when they pulled out the lines that were 18-inch lines, they were down to about 4 or 5 inches because of the gunk that was built up into them. So that's what local government aid is doing. And that's how they figure when housing is over prior 1940 or 1940 to 1970. That's how that particular formula was formulated. I managed to get up early on a variety of Mondays to go sit through them, which was just a pleasurable experience. So the cookies were the best, I have to say. The cookies were the best. So when you want to try and denigrate this particular formula because we based it on the one thing that was calculable on infrastructure needs of a town, whether it's western Minnesota, southern Minnesota, or in the metro area, understand that infrastructure, and as a builder, you should understand how the lifetime of infrastructure is. And how do you replace it? Do you want us to raise property taxes to do that, or you just want us to let it collapse? We have some choices. And we as a state, I think the choice should be that we help small and large and mid-sized cities replace their infrastructure so people can live the healthy lives that we're supposed to live.
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wasn't suggesting that we should be rationing how much people eat or drink to save the sewers. I understand that aspect of it. But, you know, we've listened to a lot of rhetoric in all of the campaign and all of the things we approach about fairness. We all have a definition of fairness. And, you know, I just think that the formula unfortunately ignores many communities who also have need and fails to recognize them at all. And when Representative Lien just mentioned that his city is getting about $350,000 less, I'm thinking to myself, as past mayor of our community, $350,000 less, you know, we would be tickled to death if we got $25,000 or $30,000, because that's a big part of a budget. We're not talking about second suburban rings with $200 million budgets here. I'm talking about small towns, you know, that are running on $1 million, $1.5 million, running really mean and lean and doing as best they can do for their taxpayers. So I also applaud, you know, the effort to offer property tax relief to all Minnesotans. And I say that to all Minnesotans. And I think that's one of the problems with the formula is that it falls short of recognizing more cities, the 850 cities we have, and it's falling short of that, and I think we could do a better job. I'm not saying we should totally corrupt the system in favor of everybody being on a level or equal playing field. If that were the case, we could just say, well, we got $500 million we're spending plus another $80 million. Let's just divide it all by the 5.5 million people that live in the state, and let's just pass out $100 to every community based on population. I mean, that might be, you know, a formula that is truly fair, but I'm not asking for that. But I think we're ignoring by population, by size, by total tax capacity of the city. I think it's more complicated than it's being made in this simple formula, and I think we're falling short, and I think we as a legislature have the ability to do a better job than we're doing on this issue.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Hertaus. That's actually kind of what we did early on with the LGA. We kind of flew over the state and threw nickels and dimes out, and hopefully they grew into trees that had money for people to pick off of, or cities and towns to pick off. I have a question for Ms. Dalton. See, I got the name right.
Extra credit.
It's always good to pick on the chair. How many cities are there in the state?
Ms. Dalton?
Well, are encompassed in the, I'll phrase it this way. How many cities are receiving LGA, how many are not receiving LGA, and then I'll total it together and we can do a percentage, because I think it's less than 10%.
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, Representative Mahoney, out of the 854 cities, and I always say that because I always forget when we've added or subtracted a city, but I'm going to say 854 cities, 107 do not get LGA under current law. Under this bill, 85 will not get LGA.
I knew I was close then at 10%. Mr. Chair?
Representative Mahoney, without a calculator.
Without a calculator, just a pencil, sharp one. Now, Ms. Dalton, in all these Monday morning meetings, and all the regression analysis that you did, one of the base principles from that meeting, and we could ask the chair, we could have Representative Lien, he was at all these meetings, was these 85 cities that are included in that have a higher tax capacity than they're using, and in order to meet their need. Is that correct?
You want to try that again, Representative Mahoney? That face didn't look good.
Yeah, that didn't look good.
It wasn't a helpful look. Let's put it that way.
Like, please stop.
Before it gets misunderstood.
They have a higher tax capacity than they
I
deserve. huh?
could use it as they're not spending per capita as it relates to their tax capacity. Am I getting closer to what that principle was in those particular meetings?
Ms. Dalton?
Mr. Chair, I'm still not exactly sure, but I'm going to try, and you can tell me if I'm totally off base. The revenue need that is being used as the dependent, or the revenue base that's being used as the dependent or variable, the proxy for spending, is not all spending. I think that's what you're getting at. It is about, on average, it's about 50% of spending. It's more for some cities and less for other cities, depending on what their other sources of revenue are.
We're getting closer. But that's okay. I'll end up going down a tax line that I probably shouldn't, because I'm getting too deep into the weeds here. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Mahoney.
I'll skip the question, and I'll just say I know that those particular meetings, we spent more time trying to figure out how to be fair to as many possible cities, as much of the population of the state of Minnesota, than we did on any other issue, because we knew that the only way we get buy-in on this particular thing is to get it spread as far and as wide as we possibly can, and be as fair as we can. And this formula is actually explainable even for a tax neophyte like me. I can actually go to a door and say, you got cities, if you got housing in this city, or housing of this age, or housing of this age, you've got needs and you've got your spending per capita, here's how the formula works. It's fairly simple. And we got 90% of the cities, or better. Well, maybe not better, but we got pretty close to 90% of the cities included in this. And if we can get 90% in this particular building or this particular complex, we could pass a bonding bill.
Representative Linchewski. All right. Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sort of thinking about passing, but it seems to me, just in general, and I'm sorry to hear there are people who want to add cities to the LGA formula. I think it's, the wrong way to go, Representative Hertas. And, because I think if you look at the tax analysts, they will tell you that LGA is a spending enabler. And clearly, when you've got the implicit price deflator as the measurement, you are encouraging spending. So it's always easy to spend when it's other people's money. And I'll still stand and say this is a program that, while yes, there is some need, I'd be against, encouraging the growth of it. So, unfortunately, it's growing. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Runbeck. Representative Garofalo, did you want back in?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, for Ms. Dalton, on the runs we're seeing here, we see communities whose numbers are going down, but in the last column it lists it as a 8 increase. Are we basing that off of the previous year instead of baseline? Is that why?
Ms.
Ms.
Chair,
Dalton, I'm sorry.
Representative Garofalo, what this is showing is the increase from 2013. When I do the run of current law for 2014,
Okay.
that's also what I show. And the run that I did, it's a baseline out last year, at the beginning of the session for current law 2014, did essentially the same thing.
Representative Garofalo.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dalton, and thank you for doing that, because I know sometimes we just we use the numbers off of baseline law. But I actually agree with the presentation of data this way, that if we look at it from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 14, if you're expecting a $300,000 increase and you only get a $200,000 increase, you're not being cut, you're getting a $200,000 increase. But I had a question for my friend, Representative Marquardt, because he made a comment I just want to clue in on, and he talked about, and I think I'm right here, that the LGA formula is going to be $506 million, and you said it doesn't get us to where we need to be, I think is what your words were. And I'm just wondering, what does that number in your book need to be? What is that number? Because the Democrats aren't doing what they want to do right now. They're doing what they think they can get away with. If you give us the full Monty, what do you think it's going to be, Representative Marquardt?
Representative Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back in 2003, the certified amount was $587 million. And so we're going to be, 81 million short of that still from 2003 levels. But as you mentioned, what the Democrats are doing, property tax relief is what we're doing. And just the opposite of what we've seen the last 10 years. And so we could go on to more of what we're doing, but just in this portion of it, a major component is to take the burden of property taxes off of our senior citizens on fixed incomes, our families, our farmers, our small businesses. And this approach, by trying to recoup some of the lost LGA dollars over the years, helps provide some of that property tax relief back.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Marquardt, but I understand, and I disagree with your philosophy, but you guys have total control of government. You're going to pass what you want. I just want to know what that number is. I want the taxpayers of Minnesota to know. In 14, we're at $506 million. You're the one who said that it doesn't go all the way. It doesn't where things need to be. I want to know what that number is. In your opinion, I don't hold your whole caucus to that number, but what do you think that number is to fully fund LGA in your personal vision?
No.
Representative Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you have a calculator out?
Yeah, no, I don't have a calculator.
You need to borrow Representative Mahoney's pencil.
I'm just saying that what we had in 2003 certified was $587 million. If I had my druthers, I would like to see that level again. That's not going to probably occur. But I firmly believe that the dollars we put into this program, the homestead credit state refund that's also out there, helps lower property taxes. And I think the more that we can lower property taxes, which is a very regressive tax, helps our senior citizens on fixed incomes out in rural Minnesota in District 4B. 22% of the citizens there are senior citizens. And, anything you can do to relieve the burden on our families, to put a few extra dollars in their pockets, I think middle-class families is really important. So, what's the number? I'd like to see it. I realize the political realities of things. We're not going to reach $587 million, but that was a high watermark at one time with inflation. The inflation, it was 587 with inflation at that time back in 2003. So I don't know if I'm answering your questions, but I do think the property tax relief, whether or not it's through local government aid, the homestead credit state refund, which Representative Dabney is carrying, are very, very important property tax relief programs.
Mr. Chairman. And
Representative Garofalo.
Ms. Dalton, I just want to make sure, are these calendar year or fiscal year numbers we're seeing here for LGA?
Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, these are calendar year, which are paid in the next state fiscal year. So calendar year or pay 2014 is actually paid in fiscal year 15 for the state budget.
Okay.
Representative Garofalo.
Okay, so Representative Marquardt, is there any way I can ask the question that you're going to give me the number that says this is what LGA is fully funded at? Because if you're not, I'm not going to ask the question over and over. But is there any way I can ask that question, or is it just going to be kind of like a lot of other things? It's just going to, whatever it is, we want more.
Representative Garofalo, I think that, or Marquardt, I think it's just a yes or no.
No, I think actually, if it was funded at 100%, I think there is a number to that on the formula. So I guess if that's what you were asking, there is a technical number, 100%. I guess then I don't know.
Ms. Dalton.
It's just, I don't know. I'm not understanding your question.
Absent the partisan tennis game here, what would mathematically, I guess, be fully funding this formula?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if you were going to pay 100% of the unmet need current aid gap, it would be roughly $400 million more. The total unmet need for all cities under this current formula is $827 million.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Marquardt, is that enough? Is that the amount where you would say, you know what, we're good? $827 million, is that the goal?
Representative Marquardt. And then we're going to end this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Representative Garofalo, I don't think that's the goal. We're being realistic. We are reversing the trend that has been set by legislatures when they have balanced the budget on the backs of property taxpayers. We are reversing that trend. And go back home, Representative Garofalo, and ask your folks if they've appreciated the property tax increases that have been hit upon their citizens. I know when I'm out and about talking to my residents, that's a huge concern. And we talk a lot about job creators. And in the last 2 years, on our job creators, our businesses, industrial, and our farmers, the economy, the increase in property taxes have been $345 million. And what gets me is I hear a lot of talk about taxes on our job creators, and yet in the last 2 years, I haven't heard a lot from a lot of members talking about $345 million of property tax increases on our job creators, on our small businesses, on our farmers. And we're saying enough is enough with this, Representative Garofalo. Enough is enough. We're going to start with local government aid. We're going to start with a homestead credit state refund to provide needed, valuable, significant property tax relief, folks. And so local government aid, I think $506 million is good. I mean, realistically, politically, that's what we can, I think we can do. Maybe, I don't know. But the key is we're telling folks out there, property tax increases and balancing the budget on your backs, no more of that. We're going to do a straight-up, honest budget and do it that way.
Thank you.
Representative Garofalo, very briefly, and then I thought we could hear from people who actually do local budgets.
So in closing, so that we don't get another 15 members into the conversation and wrap this up, just to be clear, Representative Marquardt, I'm just looking for a number out of you of what enough would be. And the reality is you're not willing to give me a number because with the Democrats in total control, enough government spending is a myth and a legend. It doesn't exist. It's like the boogeyman or the tooth fairy. It doesn't exist. Whatever the level of spending is, with the Democrats in total control of the state, they will be demanding even higher taxes and even higher spending, regardless of the number. You can take that to the bank, Representative Marquardt.
Representative Lien, you have some testifiers. I think, go right ahead, sir.
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. I have in support the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, the League of Minnesota Cities, an individual from the metropolitan cities as well.
Great. One moment, please. Representative Linchewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, if I may, before your testimony starts, Representative Lien, I just want to thank all the locally elected officials who are here. I know it's a big day. today and you're having your reception, and we just appreciate so many people who've come down to hear this bill and just look forward to hearing more yet. And I know we have to come back at a later time, but before they all go off, just wanted to recognize that they're here. So.
Thank you for doing that, and let me extend my appreciation as well. We do only have this room until 5:45, and we do have a full agenda. So we will be reconvening in room 5 at 6 o'clock. Because we'll be recessing here at 5:45. So everybody knows I wanted to give a full airing and debate, but we do have a timeline here. Mayor Algren?
Thank you very
Welcome.
much.
If you'd please state your name for the committee and then proceed with your testimony.
Bruce Algren, AHLGREN. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for having us here today. I'm the mayor of the city of Cloquet and the current president of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. On behalf of our over 80-member GMC member cities, I'm here to say that we support this proposal and would like to thank Representative Lien for carrying file number 1608. Over the years, local government aid has been essential to building strong communities across the state, especially in Greater Minnesota. By assisting those cities with relatively low tax bases, high needs, meet those without resorting to oppressively high property taxes. Unfortunately, the LGA's reliability and effectiveness as a tax relief program has been hobbled over the past decade, and by chronic underfunding, unallotment, and year-to-year freezes of LGA payments, which prevented cuts to cities, but also prevented increase in those cities who should have gotten one. The formula wasn't working, and it's time to reboot. Last year, I was honored to be appointed by the Governor's Tax Reform Advisory Group, the local government aid, which consisted of 15 mayors from around the state, communities large, small, rural, urban, and suburban. After much discussion, we came up with a set of goals for LGA formula. Those goals were to be simple, more stable, more predictable, and more inclusive, and with fewer need factors and side pots for regional centers, small cities, or jobs and aids formula for simpler. I've got a bunch of other stuff here, but I think basically what I'm saying is property taxes, and it's the mayor of Cloquet, and I appreciate the fact that you were mayor at one time. You know, our taxes have gone up, our property taxes have gone up. Local government aid, the city of Cloquet alone since 2003 has lost over $14 million, and that's a population of only 12,500. And we've made cuts, we've made hard cuts, and even after we probably get some local government aid, our job is to probably keep those cuts in place as much as we can and just lower our property tax rates. And that's what this job will do. $80 million is essential to bring us back at least even a little bit to where we were. And so instead of reading the rest of the stuff, I'll stop at that, and thank you very much for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Algren. Mr. Sattler? I thought we'd start out and we'll move in. It's the geography teacher in me. Sorry, council member.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Mark Sather, and I'm the city manager in White Bear Lake, and I'm also president of Metro Cities, an organization representing 86 cities in our metro region. We're here to support House File 1608. Metro Cities appreciates the opportunity to work with Representative Devine and other city organizations on improving the local government aid structure. We also appreciate the work of the governor and mayors on the LGA task force in providing an important starting point for this work. Metro Cities supports House File 1608 as it significantly improves the formula and allows LGA to be distributed in a more equitable manner, in a manner that's more understandable, more reliable, and more predictable. And I place emphasis on predictability. It's really important with our local budgets. LGA is a critical component of the state aid, or the state and local fiscal partnership, and in recent years has been significantly reduced due to the state budget crisis. Cities in the metro area were particularly hard hit with these reductions, and many metropolitan cities no longer receive any LGA. The metropolitan area right now receives just 30% of the LGA distribution. Metro Cities' legislative policies support LGA supports LGA reforms that serve the needs of our cities and more equitably in a program that better addresses the needs of our cities. Many of our cities are affected, and particularly those that are fully developed suburbs. They're characterized by aging infrastructure, shifting demographics, high redevelopment needs, and which have long been caught in the blind spot of the LGA program. House File 1608 better addresses these needs of metro communities and the diversity of the city's needs and their characteristics. The proposed structure also improves the equity of the distribution program, as it would improve it from 30% right now to 40% under the new bill. We appreciate these improvements to the formula, but also the appropriation of an additional $80 million. This will go a long way toward restoring the aid that's been lost over the past several years, and I'd like to just maybe conclude my remarks based on some of the conversation I heard prior, but representing a city of 25,000, which is fully developed. And I might add, we support the fact that all the metro cities, this is consistent with our board. You'll hear from Minnesota cities. You've heard from the Coalition of Outside Cities. It's pretty rare that this diverse group, which many times has had strong differences of opinion, have come together to agree on legislation. This is indeed a compromise. My particular city does not benefit from it directly. Our aid would not increase under this, but it does provide some degree of predictability that the aid that we currently receive will more likely be continued, or that we'd be able to avoid dramatic shifts in that as we approach our budget. But one of the questions that was brought up is, how would this money be used? I'd point out, and I think many of you saw that over the past couple of years, a report, I believe, from the State Auditor's Office, that local units of government have really held down their property tax increases over the last few years. We bit the bullet, and I know in our community we did. We had to sacrifice a lot of the services, but we recognized that not only were our governments in dire straits, but our residents and our taxpayers were too. We went 3 years without a levy increase, and now it's time for us to start trying to make that up a little bit. We were also careful not to cut into the core services of police and fire. You often hear that. Those are our most essential services, obviously. And yet, during that time, to maintain those services, we were taking money from infrastructure improvements, parks, environmental mandates and related improvements in our city, protective inspections, and to offset other losses. In addition to losses in local government aid, we've had considerable losses ranging anything from investment earnings to permit fees and so forth. A lot of the fees that come from different sources to support our services have been dropped dramatically. So with some reinstatement of LGA, I think a lot of cities will be able to begin recovering from 3 or 4 years of very austere budgets. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this bill, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Sather. Councilmember Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Betsy Hodges. I am here today in my capacity as president of the League of Minnesota Cities. We represent well over 800 of the 854 cities here in the state of Minnesota. About 2.5 hours ago, the League of Minnesota Cities Board of Directors was meeting and voted unanimously to support House File 1608. The motion was moved and seconded both by members of the board who represent cities that do not get local government aid. To keep it short and simple, because I know the time is running, we of course support an increase in appropriation, but we support 1608 in particular, and we appreciate the bill being before you. We support in particular that it is a simpler formula, that it reduces volatility year over year, and that it has an inflation factor. We think it's a great bill. I think it's a moment in history that all three of these organizations are testifying and have come together to support this formula. And thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have on the list also Gary Carlson from the League of Minnesota Cities. Mr. Nope, very good. I like that answer. And Bradley Peterson from the coalition. Picking up the trend. Any last questions from members? Seeing none, Representative Lien, any closing comments on your bill?
Other than you've heard the testimony from the various city groups around the state, and, I think not just the support, but the fact that they were so involved with the formula to really try to accommodate and try to please as many folks around the state as possible is very telling of the, what this bill is achieving.
All right. Thank you. With that, Representative Lien renews his motion to House File 1608 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in the division report. Thank you very much. Members and to the public, because of the tight timeline we're on, and the fact that there is a Greater Minnesota testifier on House File 1635. Representative Allen, are you still in the room? No. Bummer. Can we do his in 10 minutes?
Give the chair from the witness.
Right. Representative Simonson. Representative Simonson, the chair moves House File 1607 be before the committee for possible inclusion in the division report. Representative Simonson, to your bill, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and I'll be as quick as I possibly can. House File 1607, members, is a relatively simple, I hope, clarifying bill with respect to imposing and collection of local lodging taxes. Several cities, as you know, including my city, City of Duluth, impose a local transient lodging tax and have done so for many years, in my case since about 1970. These taxes are, by statute, used primarily for tourism and convention center promotion. A 2011 law requires that any local lodging tax that's collected by the state to use the statutory definition of lodging in 297A as the tax base. MS 469-190 definition of lodging differs slightly, which this bill will correct to avoid any possible confusion. The main difference, members, is with the inclusion of fees charged by online travel companies. The change was made in 2011, and we are very simply bringing 469-190 into line to avoid confusion. We believe clearly it is the nationwide trend to consider Internet booking company fees to be part of the taxable amount. And lastly, members, this bill will ensure a level playing field. Many smaller independent hotels, as an example, do not use Internet-based booking services, while most large chains do. We should have no competitive advantages within statute. Fiscal note, which should be hopefully in your packet at least, shows no impact to any state funds, and I can state fairly comfortably that, at least in concept, the League of Minnesota Cities does support this bill. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Simonson. Mr. Carlson, thank you for jogging in. Please identify yourself for the tape and proceed with your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Joel Carlson. I own a government affairs business here in St. Paul, and I'm here on behalf of an association I've represented for several years called Travel Tech. And Travel Tech is a national association of online travel companies, travel agents, and others in the tourism and hospitality business. And we do have some concerns about House File 1607 that I'd like to share with the committee. I had a chance to speak with you and with Representative Simonson earlier today about those concerns. And I would first say that it's not our position that this clarifies what the legislature did in the special session in 2011. And I'm reliving a bad memory because when they opened the Capitol on the 20th of July and let us in and we saw the bill, we were surprised to see the travel intermediary language in the tax bill that was adopted. It wasn't in either bill. And so it has given us some concern. It took us over 12 months to negotiate with the Department of Revenue over a revenue notice of how to even implement the tax that was imposed in that bill. And we certainly don't believe, and there is dispute as to whether or not this tax applies to local lodging taxes. And just a couple things about local lodging taxes and why this gives us such concern. According to the Department of Revenue, there are 10 jurisdictions that have lodging taxes that have been passed under special laws, and there are about 120 local jurisdictions that oppose them. And I say about 120 because nobody really knows what the exact number actually is. There are only 4 cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Bowabic, that have the tax administered and collected by the Department of Revenue. Every other jurisdiction, about 130 jurisdictions, collect them locally. And if this bill were to pass, what you would be saying is to travel agents, all travel intermediaries, this isn't just online travel companies, that they would have to become taxpayers in every local jurisdiction and file 130 individual monthly returns, many where they would not have any activity in a month. Another problem with that is that most of the local jurisdictions don't have this information available online. We don't even have the ability to get it. Duluth, which is one of the biggest ones, biggest cities that has a local lodging tax, doesn't even have their tax forms online, nor what the rate is. And so you're asking companies to try and become local taxpayers in every jurisdiction, and that is just an administrative burden that I fear is just too high of a hurdle. And so that's the one of the main concerns that we have. The other thing that I want to make clear is that the lodging tax is not avoided through an online reservation. The online reservation and the travel intermediary tax only applies to the service that the travel intermediary charges. The other portion of that transaction gets paid to the hotelier, and they pay the local sales tax, the local lodging tax, and the state sales tax on the lodging itself. What the bill did in 2011 is it required travel intermediaries to pay the sales tax on the difference. So if I have a $60 transaction and it's 45 of that is for the room and 10 of that is for local taxes, that gets paid to the hotelier and they pay the local taxes. Then the online travel intermediary or travel agent pays the sales tax on that last increment. That's all we pay the sales tax on. We don't pay it on the entire amount of the bill. I'm happy to share the revenue notice with the committee, Mr. Chairman, and members on how that tax is actually being implemented, but trying to force travel agents and online travel companies to become a local taxpayer in 130 different jurisdictions is going to be extremely difficult to administer. And what I fear is that we won't have, for the tourism end of it, which I'm also very passionate about, for the tourism end of it, we won't have the offerings to market these properties in greater Minnesota, because you just can't afford the risk and the liability of being a local taxpayer and somehow being out of compliance. So that's our concerns. I've had a good conversation with Representative Simonson about those, and we'd happy to answer questions, but we do have serious concerns about this provision. And it's also it's Section 29 in House File 1493 as well, in Senator or Representative Lincheski's bill, so we're watching it both places. I want to sneak past me. So
No. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Carlson is right. We did have a discussion earlier this afternoon, and I have committed to him that as we go forward, certainly be willing to work with him and hear his concerns, and we'll try to come up with a product that meets everybody's needs. So just want to let you and the committee be aware of that.
Thank you. Questions from members?
And
Mr. Carlson.
And Mr. Chairman and members, if we get to a product that requires travel agents and travel intermediaries to be a taxpayer in every local jurisdiction and not file one monthly return like we do with the Department of Revenue, that's going to be a significant problem. And just don't want to leave saying we can resolve that issue, because that one is going to be a very difficult hurdle. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you.
To answer questions.
Any questions from members? Seeing none, with that, Representative Simonson renews his motion that House File, let's get this right, 1607 be laid over for possible inclusion in the division report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Atkins.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you. Representative Atkins, let's see, 857. The chair moves House File 857 be before the committee and laid over for possible inclusion in the division report. Representative Atkins, to your bill.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we can speak about it separately, but my understanding was that we were trying to move this to the general register. So
And my understanding is that it stays here in the division.
All right, then we'll talk about that some more.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Back when I was first elected in 1871, there was a reliance upon the fire insurance premium as a small surcharge on fire insurance homeowners policies, as well as then in 1971, that was expanded auto insurance. And what it's used for is to supplement fire safety efforts. By the way, I want to welcome my co-author, Representative Davids, on the bill. This is, we've had an issue relative to police and firefighter underfunding of pensions. They come up with a solution that's about 80% reliant upon their own efforts, contributing more, asking for serving longer periods of time, seeking less out of the pension at the end, and they've solved about 80% of that on their own. With the remaining 20%, they've looked to the traditional source of funding, and that's why I referenced what happened in 1871 for fire safety and firefighter pensions, and then in 1971 for automobile insurance that supplemented police officers' pensions. And they've suggested, and I've authored the bill along with Representative Davids, a $5 surcharge on those homeowners' policies and a $5 surcharge on an auto policy. With the money being used, what it's been used for some time now, which is to assist in reaching the 90% funding level for their pensions. Now, in Inver Grove Heights, where I'm from, what I would call your attention to is that we've got about $1.5 million to $2 million a year that we save as a result of having volunteer firefighters. I raise that point to you because that saves the average household in Inver Grove about $150 to $160 per year. The small request in this bill, which is about $5 per premium, is a heck of a lot cheaper compared to the overall cost of having a full-time firefighting service in Inver Grove. And so it's an easy call for us in a community like ours, and I think, and I'd welcome Representative Davids to offer a few comments as well, Mr. Chairman.
Before we go there, Representative Atkins, do you have are you offering the 857A1 amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am.
And it's to get the bill in the order you prefer?
It is.
With that, members, any discussion? The chair will move the 857A1 amendment. Any discussion? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Representative Davids, 25 words or less?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wholeheartedly support the bill of Chair Atkins.
Nicely done. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to testify regarding House File 857? Sir.
I can't believe I did it.
Take all the time you want in the next 2 minutes.
Do what I can. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Aaron Cockey, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Minnesota Association of Farm Mutual Insurance Companies. That's a mouthful. And I'm here tonight to testify against House File 857, and specifically I'm here to testify against the $5 surcharge on auto and homeowners policies. We at MAFMIC believe it's bad public policy to tie a benefit to a single revenue source. Benefits should stand on their own virtues and be dispersed from the general fund. Additionally, Minnesota consumers have seen significant increases in insurance costs related to increased loss frequency and severity. The average homeowner in Minnesota has seen their premium go up 267% in the last 10 years, and this is no time to increase those costs further. Furthermore, this surcharge is regressive. The surcharge for the $100,000 sports car Adrian Peterson drives to the new Viking Stadium will be $5. And $5 for the $500 car a working mom drives back and forth from her 2 jobs. The surcharge will be $5 for the $1 million mansion on Lake Minnetonka and $5 for a $30,000 starter home in northern Minnesota. This is unfair to lower-income Minnesotans. Another issue that makes this bill problematic is that it calls for a $5 surcharge per policy. Some companies have multiple cars on one policy, and other companies have multiple policies for multiple vehicles. This treats consumers differently depending on whom they insure with. And how are people who refuse to pay the surcharge dealt with? This bill specifically says that the surcharge cannot be considered premium for any other purpose. This means if somebody pays their entire bill minus the $5, we cannot cancel their premium, their policy for non-payment of premium. What happens then? Members, we don't oppose the police and firefighters trying to make sure their pensions are funded, but we do think this bill in its current form has too many problems. Please oppose this surcharge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to testify as efficiently as that gentleman did?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, we have multiple testifiers, volunteer fighters, full-time firefighters, police officers, League of Cities, League of Counties, the Carlson brothers, as you know, who are frequent flyers in this committee, all prepared to testify in support of the bill. But I think what I said and what Representative David said even more succinctly sums up what they would share with the committee.
All right.
But they're here to answer any questions that the members of the committee may have.
Then let's phrase it this way. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to testify against the bill? All right. Questions from members? Representative Garofalo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to be is the DFL caucus meeting here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was going to suggest.
That's the traffic in and out.
So then
You're welcome to join.
You should.
Oh, I got such a great joke, but we're on TV.
Oh, yeah, we're on TV and we're tight on time.
Mr. Chairman, so I'll ask Representative Davids this question then, since he's up there with Representative Atkins.
Okay.
Representative Davids, the DFL majority is proposing over $2 billion in tax increases. Why don't we fund this important priority from those tax increases as opposed to assessing another surcharge on the taxpayers and ratepayers of Minnesota?
Representative Atkins, Representative Davids, I'm sorry, I didn't hear who that was directed to.
Chairman, to Representative Garofalo, that's certainly one way to do it. We could do that. We have a history in the state of funding firefighters and ambulance-type folks from surcharges on homeowners and auto insurance. And the reason I'm on this bill is because I know that we all support our volunteer firefighters here, but what we're looking at there is there are firefighters that receive less than $1,000 per year of service. So if they've served 25 years, they might end up with a lump sum payment of $23,000, $24,000, and that's certainly not adequate. So I'm looking for a way to fund this, so that debate can certainly take place. If it was an appropriation out of the general fund, that would certainly be acceptable to me, but this seems to be a way to do this with some history of doing this type of a surcharge in the past. We're looking at, as the gentleman from the Farm Mutual said, they're looking at we've had tremendous increases in the past in homeowners. That's true because of claims and so forth. A $5 surcharge on a $3,000 homeowner's policy or a $500 homeowner's policy, I think most folks that I've talked to have said we'd happily do that to help out our volunteer firefighters. But if there's some other funding mechanism, I'd certainly be willing to look at that. I'm not the chief officer of the bill, but I'm certainly supporting the efforts of Chair Atkins.
And Mr. Chairman, for
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. For Representative Atkins, in your statement, you said that 20% is coming from this surcharge, 80% from other sources. Am I assuming then that rates of return and growth in those funds is included in that 80%?
No.
Representative Atkins.
Representative Garofalo, all of those things are part of that 80% solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Davids, can you provide us with a history of when we have added surcharges to various, whatever it is, policies or other to fund? And my other question, Mr. Chair, is where does this bill sit in the Pension Commission?
Representative Atkins.
Mr. Chairman, I think on the Pension Commission, it was recommended by the Pension Commission. The other portion of the question was addressed to Representative Davids.
My apologies. Representative Davids.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Erickson, for one example, the 2% fire surcharge for fire training for volunteer firefighters. We've had surcharges on auto insurance, but that's more to do with theft and things like that, so that really wasn't for pensions. But we have in the past, and I believe there's some others, maybe Chair Atkins could add a few there.
Chair Atkins?
The main one I'd call your attention to, Mr. Chairman and Representative Erickson, is that this literally dates back in excess of 100 years relative to firefighters and 40 years on the auto side to assist with the police pension.
Representative Erickson? Thank you very much. Any more discussion from members? Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill appears to only address the $5 and how it's going to be collected and dispersed. Where do we get to read about the reforms that are occurring to the funds?
Yes, Representative Atkins.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Runbeck, why don't I can send you the whole solution that's been proposed. I just, in summary, it's about 80% is being funded and delivered by the firefighters, the police officers, and the communities for which they work. They're doing about 80%. It just didn't quite get them to that point where they were going to get to 90% funding. And that's why they started to look at and explore other options. But I'll send you the details of that,
Mr. Chair and Representative Atkins, I would appreciate that. This has gotten a lot of publication, notification, and citizens are writing, ordinary citizens saying, why, I don't get a bailout of my pension funds, why are we bailing out, any organization with ordinary taxpayers, extracting more from our taxpayers? Do you have a great answer for that?
Representative Atkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Runbeck, I've responded to those with exactly, and I've shared with them the details that this is, number one, it's historic. This is where we've looked to fund firefighter and police pensions, as Representative Davids pointed out. And then secondly, that the firefighters and police officers are doing 80% on their own. And then finally is that this is the number one recruiting and retention tool to get volunteer firefighters right now. And we could have testimony to that effect too. But at the end of the day, they get a modest pension after 20 or 30 years of service, and it's a very low price to pay relative to the savings and property tax dollars in the multi-millions in a community like Inver Grove, or perhaps you have volunteers in your community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just going to answer Representative Runbeck's question. That is being addressed in the pension bill. I'm not sure if it's pension 1 or pension 2, but that will be coming forward in the pension bill.
Thank you very much. And there is information in members' packets regarding the 100% solution of this, which this is 20. Representative Erickson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Representative Atkins, why is this pension fund underfunded?
Representative Atkins.
Mr. Chair, Representative Runbeck.
Erickson.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at Representative Runbeck. Representative Erickson, I'm sorry. A couple reasons. One is that the amount that's been contributed by these surcharges over the last decade in particular have dropped. And in addition to that, the investment returns in those funds have dropped. And that's a pretty potent combination for ending up with an underfunding.
With that, the Chair renews his motion that House File 857 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in the division report. Thank you very much, Representative Atkins. Thank you very much, Representative Davids. Members and audience, at this time, the committee will adjourn to the call of the chair approximately 6:30 p.m. in room 5. If there's guys standing at the doors with badges, don't go in, but that's always a good rule of thumb anyways. With that, we stand in recess. Thank you.